You see them every day: the polished facade on social media, flawless productivity, and rapid career growth. But behind this front lies a paradox. The more we invest in becoming a better version of ourselves, the worse we feel. This is not a personal failure. It is a symptom of a cultural epidemic. Studies show that socially prescribed perfectionism among students has increased by 33% in just a few decades. An entire generation is facing unprecedented pressure to be perfect. Decades ago, psychoanalyst Karen Horney dissected this mechanism like an investigator, and her findings explain the root of modern burnout. This trap operates by a clear set of rules, and the first rule is this: to build an ideal self, you must first betray your real self. To understand this mechanism, we only need to answer two questions. First, why do people obsessed with success often experience deeper depression from failure than those who are at peace with their flaws? Logic suggests the opposite, but reality is harsh. We will find the answer to this question in Section 5 when we dissect the mechanism of neurotic pride. The second question is, how does our brain, whose primary job is to protect us from pain, create a ruthless inner dictator that causes more suffering than any external enemy? We will uncover the origins of this inner tyrant in Section 7, putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. The first question addresses the fragility of success, and the second, the inner tyrant. If you have ever felt like you were running in circles trying to fix something about yourself only to make things worse, this video is for you. We won't offer generic advice but an X-ray of your inner conflict. You will see its components: the tyranny of the shoulds, the ideal self, and the despised self. Understanding this mechanism is like finally getting the instruction manual for a complex device you've used your whole life without knowing what all the buttons do. Pressing them randomly, you got unpredictable and often painful results. We promise a shift from a vague sense of guilt to crystal clarity, from the eternal question of "what's wrong with me?" to the precise answer, "this is how my inner conflict is structured." This video has a clear structure, a map for our investigation. In 5 minutes, we will dissect the central mechanism, the tyranny of the shoulds. You will see the specific list of invisible rules that secretly governs your decisions and emotions, the engine of your self-criticism. In 12 minutes, we will descend to the darkest level. You will meet your shadow side, the despised self, and understand the source of the deepest, most irrational self-hatred. This is the emotional core of the problem. In 18 minutes, after a complete analysis, we will move to the main event: Karen Horney's step-by-step strategy for dismantling this system. This is the section of hope and resolution. Every part is essential to understanding the whole. Stay with us. It all begins not with a single major trauma, but with a quiet, universal choice that every child makes alone. At the heart of this choice is not malicious intent from parents, but a fundamental dynamic: a small, dependent being in a world of omnipotent adults. Every child is born with a core personality, which Horney called the real self. It is a spontaneous source of authentic feelings, desires, and talents. Like a young tree, it instinctively reaches for the sun, growing at its own pace. But reality strikes back. The child encounters basic anxiety, a profound feeling of isolation and helplessness. This anxiety, like a constant cold wind, forces an unconscious choice. The child hides their vulnerable real self in exchange for safety, and this defensive strategy requires the creation of an entirely new, false personality. This trade seems like a good deal. The new strategy, for instance, becoming obedient and agreeable, yields immediate results: praise, predictability, and reduced anxiety. At first glance, this appears to be a natural process of adaptation. We all learn to control our impulses to live in society. But the price of this security is exorbitantly high. By abandoning the real self, the child suppresses not just bad behavior, but the entire spectrum of genuine emotions: spontaneous joy, healthy anger, and sincere curiosity. The bright flame of their life force is replaced by the steady but dim light of an energy-saving bulb. They lose touch with what they truly want and feel. This gap, this inner void, cannot remain empty. It demands to be filled with an artificial construct. But where does one find the blueprint for this new personality when the internal compass is broken? The child begins to assemble it from external sources. They absorb their parents' expectations. You must be smart. Their teachers' demands. You must be diligent. And later, media ideals, you must be successful. This is not flexible adaptation, but the construction of a rigid, idealized image, the ideal self. Modern culture amplifies this process to an extreme. Unlike the living real self, which can grow and change, the ideal self is a static photograph of perfection. Any deviation from this perfect snapshot is perceived as a catastrophe, and to prevent this fragile structure from collapsing, an entire system of internal laws is created to protect it. This is where the mechanism designed for protection turns into a prison. The ideal self needs constant guarding from imperfect reality and from any manifestation of the suppressed real self. To achieve this, a system of internal control is established, masquerading as self-discipline and self-improvement. But this is not gentle guidance. It is a brutal dictatorship. Back in the 1940s, Karen Horney, observing her patients, gave this mechanism a precise name: the tyranny of the shoulds. Its goal is not development, but complete, unquestioning conformity to the ideal image. Thus, abandoning the real self leads not just to a loss, but to the creation of an active internal enemy. Now let's examine the legal code of this inner dictator. Welcome to the anatomy of the tyranny of the shoulds. Why do goal lists like "I should read more" or "I should be more productive" so often lead not to results, but to paralyzing procrastination? It seems these are just our standards, but that's an illusion. Healthy goals are flexible, like a riverbed guiding energy. The shoulds are a shell of ice on that river. It creates an appearance of solidity but freezes the flow of life. This isn't just a few rules, it's an exhaustive legal code. I should be a perfect parent. I should always control my emotions. I should never make mistakes. The effect of this tyranny is complete alienation from oneself. You no longer know what you want, you only know what you should do. But living under such a dictator is impossible. Therefore, the psyche develops 3 primary survival strategies, 3 social masks. The language of this inner dictator sounds like objective truth. At first glance, it is the voice of common sense, urging us to be better. But its main weapon is the language of absolutes, not "try not to be late," but "you should never be late." Not "be more attentive," but "you should always be in control." This language is incompatible with the reality of human life. Because of this absolutism, there is no concept of good enough. There are only 2 states: perfect execution of the command or total failure. According to Horney, the slightest deviation from a rule triggers the same amount of guilt as a massive one. Such a black and white evaluation system inevitably breeds a pervasive sense of fear. If these laws are so harsh, why don't we rebel? We mistakenly believe they are our own. It seems we absorb them from childhood, from parents and culture. It's just our upbringing. But this is not a collection of helpful tips. It is an entire legal system imported into our psyche. And its laws often contradict each other. You should be assertive and successful, but also you should be modest and liked by everyone. This creates impossible demands. The tyrant's greatest trick is to make us believe its voice is our own. We think, "It is I who wants to be perfect." And when we break our own rules, punishment follows immediately. What happens when we break an internal law? We feel guilt. It seems that guilt is a useful mechanism, motivating us to improve. But the reality is a harsh blow. The dictator perceives a violation of a should as proof of our worthlessness. The punishment is not just guilt, it is a wave of irrational self-hatred. I failed again, I am worthless. This process creates a vicious cycle like soil erosion. Self-hatred is a downpour that washes away self-confidence. To cope with the anxiety, we cling even more tightly to the shoulds. The rules become stricter, the probability of breaking them increases, which in turn leads to more self-hatred. To escape this cycle of constant self-judgment, the psyche resorts to extreme measures. It chooses one of 3 roles, one of 3 protective masks. Why, in the same stressful situation, does one person try to please everyone, another goes on the attack, and a third simply disappears? These are not different types of people. These are the three primary survival strategies that Horney called moving toward people, moving against people, and moving away from people. The compliant type seeks love, the aggressive type seeks power, and the detached type seeks independence. We all have all three impulses. But in a neurotic personality, one strategy becomes dominant and compulsive. The problem is not the strategy itself, but its inflexibility. The person does not choose how to react. They are forced to follow a script, even when it is destructive. Now let's examine each of these masks under a microscope, starting with the one that seems most harmless. How can the desire for love become a source of unhappiness? The logic of the compliant type, or pleaser, is simple. If you love me, you won't hurt me. They believe they can earn acceptance through self-sacrifice and suppressing their own needs. But the cost of this strategy is enormous. The pleaser suppresses not only their desires but also the healthy aggression necessary to defend their boundaries. They cannot say no. Inside this saint, a huge amount of repressed anger accumulates. Horney called this smiling depression. Outwardly, there is kindness. Inwardly, a boiling cauldron of rage they are afraid to even acknowledge. But what if your strategy is the exact opposite, not to seek love, but to seize power? Why do people who seem to be masters of their own lives so often feel lonely? The logic of the aggressive type is the law of the jungle. If I have power, no one can hurt me. Emotions are a weakness. One must be tough and always win. But by suppressing vulnerability, they lose the capacity for empathy and friendship. All relationships are viewed through the lens of utility. Their worldview is like using a hammer. Every problem looks like a nail. Their greatest fear is helplessness. Therefore, they are doomed to a perpetual war with the world, even when there is no threat. But there is a third way to cope with the world, to try to escape from it. How does the pursuit of complete independence lead to a prison? The logic of the detached type, or hermit, is to avoid pain. If I depend on no one, I cannot be hurt. They keep their distance, avoid emotional involvement, and value solitude. But this independence is actually fear. They avoid not just pain, but strong feelings in general, including joy and love. They become a spectator in their own life. Their precious freedom is a wall that protects them, but also confines them. They are safe, but they are not living. Whichever of these three masks we wear, the psyche needs a powerful mechanism to justify this choice and make us believe that this mask is our true superior self. This mechanism is called neurotic pride. It explains why people driven by a thirst for success experience deeper depression after failure than those who are at ease with their shortcomings. This is the answer to our first question. Neurotic pride is pride not in who you are, but in who you should be. It is applause for your ideal self. Unlike healthy self-esteem, which is flexible and based on reality, this pride is as fragile as glass. It requires constant external validation. Therefore, for such a person, failure is not just a mistake. It is devastating proof that their ideal self is a sham, and thus they themselves are worthless. But this shining metal of pride has a very dark opposite side. On the surface, healthy confidence and fragile pride can look identical, but their motives are opposites. Neurotic pride manifests as a need to always be right in perfectionism, and in a contemptuous attitude toward those who seem weaker. This is not a display of strength. It is a desperate attempt to hide a deep-seated self-hatred. Perfectionism is not a love of quality, but a panic-driven fear of error. Judging others is a way to feel superior by comparison. This mechanism works like a boiling pot with a tightly sealed lid. Arrogance is the steam that hisses out, creating an illusion of energy, but its purpose is to prevent the pot from exploding from the hidden fear within. This pride is built not on real achievements, but on a system of irrational claims on the world. Why do some people fly into a rage over minor daily inconveniences, as if the world owes them something? Horney called this neurotic claims. It is the unconscious belief that, by virtue of your ideal self, you deserve to be an exception to the general rules. Traffic jams shouldn't delay me. People should immediately recognize how brilliant I am. The world will never meet these demands, so the person constantly feels wronged and unappreciated. Imagine one of Horney's patients in 1950s New York furiously pounding the table because a taxi driver didn't read his mind. He is not angry at the driver, but at a reality that dared to not conform to his image of being a special person. And when the world inevitably refuses to fulfill these claims, all the blame is placed on a single culprit. How can arrogance and the deepest self-doubt coexist in one person? We tend to think of pride and self-hatred as two poles on a single scale, but they are two sides of the same coin. Neurotic pride is the inflation of the ideal self. Self-hatred is the reaction to the real self's failure to match this inflated ideal. A civil war rages within the person. The ideal self is a proud but self-proclaimed king. The real self is the despised but authentic heir. The higher the pretender's crystal throne is raised, the stronger the hatred for the rightful ruler. And now it is time to look into the dungeon where this king has thrown the real self. Let's meet the shadow cast by this crystal throne, your despised self. Where does this inner voice come from? The one that knows all your vulnerabilities and strikes them with surgical precision? If the psyche's goal is self-preservation, why does it create such a perfect tormentor? The answer lies in Horney's darkest concept. Once you create the shining image of an ideal self, a god within, you automatically create its shadow, the despised self. This is the trash bin for all the qualities that did not fit into the ideal image. But self-hatred is not you hating your real self. It is a civil war between two fictions. Your ideal self hates your despised self. Every time you show weakness or fatigue, the ideal furiously attacks the shadow, and you experience it as a wave of self-flagellation. Both the shining ideal and the hated shadow are phantoms. Your authentic, real self is trapped between them. It's like a hand caught between a hot plate, the ideal, and a block of ice, the despised. The pain is real, but its source is the clash of two extremes, not the hand itself. How does this empty construct gain so much power? We ourselves unconsciously arm our inner enemy every day. The mechanism of this self-armament is the tyranny of the shoulds. The code of rules, I must be strong, I must not make mistakes, acts as the prosecutor. Every deviation from these rules is classified as a crime. This evidence doesn't just remain as facts, it is actively projected onto the image of the despised self, making it a living embodiment of all our imperfections. The 33% increase in perfectionism since 1989 means that today we commit more of these crimes every day, making our shadow ever more powerful. The despised self is not who you are, but who you are forbidden to be by your own dictator. Every flash of self-hatred is not self-analysis, but an act of projection, similar to how a projector displays a pre-recorded horror film onto a blank screen. What makes a person willingly engage in self-flagellation? This self-destructive act serves a perverse defensive function. On the surface, there's a simple explanation, a preemptive strike. If I call myself a failure first, criticism from others won't hurt as much. But the reality is more complex. The goal is not to avoid criticism, but to maintain the illusion of the ideal. Every failure is proof of the despised self's reality and a threat to the entire system. By attacking it, the person is essentially saying, it's my worthless part that's to blame, but I myself, my ideal, am fine. Self-criticism is not a search for truth, but a ritual sacrifice. You sacrifice your despised self to save your God, the ideal self. This internal struggle burns through the resources of the real self and closes the trap. Why do people who achieve success so often describe an inner emptiness? The closer to the goal, the further from happiness. The problem is not just burnout or imposter syndrome. The true tragedy runs deeper. In the war between the ideal and despised selves, a third most important entity is completely ignored: the real self. This is the center of our spontaneity, our genuine desires and feelings. It is not perfect, but it is alive. The pursuit of the ideal is not a path to a better life, but a rejection of life itself. The real self is a wild garden, chaotic but full of life. The ideal self is an artificial lawn, flawless but dead. By choosing the ideal, we choose sterile emptiness. And now that we see all the parts of this machine, it is time to assemble them. This mechanism operates like a perpetual motion machine of suffering, perfectly sealed in 4 steps. Step 1. Basic anxiety and the rejection of the real self create an internal split. Step 2. To defend against the world, a false solution is created, the ideal self and its tyranny of the shoulds. Step 3. The inevitable failure to meet inhuman standards activates hatred for the despised self, which generates new, even stronger anxiety. And Step 4. Closing the loop, the brain mistakenly concludes that the tyranny was not strong enough and reinforces it. It's like scratching an itchy bite. The itch is anxiety. The scratching is the attempt to reinforce the ideal. But the action itself only irritates the skin, causing an even stronger itch. Our 3 defensive masks, the pleaser, the aggressor, and the hermit, do not break this cycle. They merely grease its gears. The pleaser seeking approval suppresses their real desires even further to conform to the ideal of a saint. The slightest hint of disapproval triggers a spiral of self-recrimination. The aggressor, striving for power, inflates the ideal of a winner and suppresses vulnerability. Any failure is a catastrophe for them, fueling hatred for their shadow self. The hermit, building an ideal of self-sufficiency, suppresses the real need for closeness. Any dependence on another person is perceived as weakness, setting off the same cycle. Which of these masks most often pulls you back into the spiral? The fuel for this engine is neurotic pride. Unlike healthy self-esteem, which is based on reality, this pride is as fragile as glass. It is built on the illusion of the ideal self and demands that this illusion never be questioned. Any criticism or failure is a direct threat. To protect this fragile construct, the system immediately activates, the tyranny of the shoulds tightens, and all hatred is unleashed upon the despised self, which has failed and disgraced the ideal. It works like dry kindling for a forest fire. On its own, it is cold, but any spark of criticism instantly ignites the flames of self-flagellation. And it is within this defense mechanism that the key to its dismantling lies. Now we can close the open loops. Why does the pursuit of perfection lead to self-hatred? Because it creates a fictional ideal in its shadow, and all energy is spent on their war. Why does it get worse the harder we try? Because our efforts are attempts to strengthen the ideal's control, which only widens the gap with reality and fuels the cycle. Realizing this leads to a point of complete despair. Your best strategies are part of the problem. Your willpower is the dictator's tool. Horney called this state the central inner conflict, the feeling that your internal compass is broken. But it is precisely here where the logic of struggle and improvement dies that she offers a completely different path. A path not upward, toward an even more radiant ideal, but inward, toward the long-forgotten real self. How can you conquer self-hatred without fixing the very flaws that cause it? Our entire logic of self-improvement screams, work harder, be more disciplined. But that is the path into the trap. Horney's solution is a gut punch. The enemy is not your flaws. The enemy is the very idea of an ideal. The goal is not to finally clear the bar. The goal is to break the bar itself. Freedom is not becoming perfect. Freedom is getting permission to be imperfect, to be human. This is a path not of construction, but of excavation, of digging up what has long been buried, of returning to your spontaneous center. And the first step is to disarm the dictator of its main weapon. How can simply observing your thoughts disarm a long-standing tyrant? It seems that fighting requires strength, not passivity. When we hear the command, "I should be perfect," we either obey or engage in an exhausting argument. Horney suggests a third way. Instead of reacting, simply start to notice, there's that "I should" thought again. That's my tyranny of the should speaking. This technique creates distance. You are no longer a slave to the command, you are its observer. A command brought into the light loses its hypnotic power. It's like becoming aware of your own breathing. You don't try to control it, you just notice it, and that observation alone makes it calmer. When the tyrant loses its voice, an opportunity arises to hear the whisper of someone else. What should you do if your real desires, "I want to rest," contradict the tyrant's commands? "I must work tirelessly." The real self speaks the language of feelings and impulses. For your whole life, these signals have been branded as weakness. Start by simply noticing them. The next step is legalization. Give yourself permission to feel what you feel without judgment. This doesn't mean you have to act on it immediately. It means acknowledging, yes, I feel envy right now. This is a real feeling. It has a right to exist. Then start small. Express your genuine opinion on a minor issue. Every small act of authenticity is like a sip of water for your real self. It erodes the foundation of the entire system, fragile neurotic pride, and replaces it with something much more solid. How can you build self-esteem on the acceptance of flaws when culture demands their eradication? Neurotic pride is a house built on an ice floe. It shatters at the slightest failure. The alternative foundation is self-compassion. It consists of 3 components. First, self-kindness in moments of failure instead of self-criticism. Second, an understanding of common humanity. Everyone makes mistakes, instead of isolation. Third, mindful acceptance of painful feelings instead of their suppression. Over 4,000 scientific studies confirm its link to psychological well-being. Neurotic pride is a performance-enhancing drug, providing a quick high and a heavy crash. Self-compassion is a healthy diet that builds real, long-term strength. Let's look again at the map of our inner world that Karen Horney drew for us. It all begins here, at the point of basic anxiety, which forces us to abandon our authentic, real self. From this point, we build a fortress, the ideal self, ruled by a ruthless dictator, the tyranny of the shoulds. To survive under this tyranny, we put on one of 3 masks: the pleaser, the aggressor, or the hermit, and fuel this illusion with fragile neurotic pride. This shining fortress has a dark dungeon, the despised self, where we cast everything imperfect. All of this is locked in a vicious cycle of self-flagellation that seems eternal. But as we have seen, there is a way out. It is not in storming the fortress, but in a quiet return to the native land of the real self. Which element on this map did you recognize most strongly in yourself? This entire exhausting struggle, which you believed was the path to happiness, was the main source of your suffering. Your problem is not that you are not good enough. Your problem is that you believed you had to be someone else, someone flawless. This is your official permission to stop fighting, permission to be tired, permission to make mistakes, permission to not know the answers, permission to be an imperfect, ordinary, living human being. This is not weakness. This is the authentic strength to be yourself in a world that demands we be perfect avatars. This is the greatest gift of Karen Horney's theory. It gives us back the right to our own real, imperfect lives. But how do we hold on to this permission in a world that screams the opposite at us every second? Horney's theory, created decades ago, is more relevant today than ever. She analyzed the American culture of her time, but it's as if she peered into our digital future. The 33% rise in socially prescribed perfectionism is not just a statistic, it's a slow-moving epidemic, amplified by social media culture. Instagram is a global exhibition of ideal selves, where everyone is forced to broadcast a flawless facade. The modern ideal worker is a direct embodiment of neurotic shoulds, always productive, always online, never tired. Knowledge of Horney's theory is not just a fact from the history of psychology. Today, it is an essential tool for survival and for preserving mental health. It is our shield against the external pressure that tries to impose an inner tyrant upon us. We have dissected the entire system. We see how the inner dictator works in tandem with external pressure. But after hearing all this, what do you consider the bigger problem in your life? Your internal tyranny of the shoulds, which you yourself maintain, or the relentless external pressure from society, culture, and social media? The answer to this question defines your personal strategy. If the problem is mainly internal, the focus should be on mindfulness and self-compassion. If it's external, the focus should be on digital hygiene, setting boundaries, and critical thinking. Write just one word in the comments that reflects your opinion. Tyranny, if you believe the root of the problem is within, or society, if you believe it is external. Let's see which one resonates more.